All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back today. We've got Stanley Rosen, Ph.D. He's a professor of political science and international relations at the University of Southern California. How are you today, sir?
Doing fine, thank you.
How's the weather there?
Warming up. It's in the 70s, will soon be 80.
All right. Well, that's something. Better than Germany, where I'm coming from. So first, before I get into the questions, I wanted to ask you, what was essentially, you've been writing about China and the relationship it has with the U.S. and various aspects of that since the 80s. What really prompted?
Yeah. Oh, I guess since the 80s, yeah, that's right. I got my Ph.D. in 79, so that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this is, you wrote in 1982, The Red Guard Factionalism and the Cultural Revolution of Guangzhou. Is that right?
Guangzhou. Yeah. The city, Canton. The city is called Canton in English.
Okay. All right. So what prompted you to be interested in China specifically? Well,
to be honest, I was pre-med in college and got a degree in English as well. But I took a semester off, traveled in Europe, went back, decided I needed a new major, and I chose political science, and I had a teacher who was Chinese, who really got me interested in Asia and China. And so I always credited him. George Yu was his name. And I met him many years later when he was dean of social science at the University of Illinois. And I always tell people that you got me interested in China studies, and so he's very flattered by that.
So what were the aspects about? I mean, obviously he was a nice guy. He had a personal relationship, but were there aspects to the culture that you said, "Wow, that's interesting. That's new"?
Well, this would have been by the mid '60s or so at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and I became interested because I was from New York City, and I became interested in just being a kind of a stranger in a strange land, as Robert Heinlein says in his book. And a lot of my friends were students, Nigerian student, Japanese, just people who didn't fit in the Southern kind of typical Southern gentleman type. I roomed with a player on the basketball team from South Philadelphia, whose father was ticket manager of the Philadelphia 76ers. And so I kind of gravitated toward international things. And in the various courses I had, Asia was of real interest to me. Can't explain why. I have no family background along those lines, but I just got interested in it. The other thing is I like languages. I took Spanish, French, and German in college. And so I liked languages. And that was another thing. I thought I should speak an Asian language. And so I went to UCLA for graduate school, and the person who taught Japan was away in Japan for 2 years. The person who taught Southeast Asia, I was his teaching assistant, turned out to be an awful lecturer, a very bad teacher. Nice guy. Later left the field. It's a long story. During the Vietnam War, he was under tremendous attack as a specialist on Thailand. So his classes were being invaded all the time when I was his TA, saying, please at least teach the course outside, make some concession, but no. And then his stole his files and published it in the Daily Bruin newspaper. Anyway, so Southeast Asia and Japan were out, and so I ended up in China. But I was interested in China anyway.
That's a great story. These are the type of stories I really like, yeah. And so you went on to actually been focused on movies. Now, have you always loved movies? I see that you got a Pulp Fiction shirt on.
That's right.
I'm assuming there's some DVDs in the background. So what was your...
20,000 or so, yeah.
Oh, geez. So what was your introduction to loving film?
Well, I always liked film, I guess, particularly in college. I went every weekend. I went to a lot of free film showings. When I was a graduate student, I joined various film clubs. Or I joined various film clubs. For some reason, I always liked film and music. I got about 20,000 discs as well. And I had 7,000 vinyl records I sold, which I didn't think were worth anything. But then now all of a sudden they are. I've always been a collector. I collected comic books when I was a kid and baseball cards. And if I still had that collection, my father had thrown all that out, I would have $20 million probably, because I had all these original comics. And my father used to say, the biggest mistake in my life is throwing out your comic books. All the Batman, the Superman, 81 years, I'll be 81 in June. So you can imagine having comic books from that era worth these days.
You would be sipping mojitos on a beach somewhere right now.
Probably.
Yeah. So let's just, before I want to get this out of the way, what are some of your favorite films?
Oh, that's a tough one. Pulp Fiction, I'm wearing the shirt. Very disappointed in 1994. The one came out, didn't win the Academy Award. There are so many films. If I look at films that I don't mind watching over and over again, and take that as a kind of yardstick for favorite films, I would say things like The Big Lebowski, Annie Hall. I mean, they're not the greatest films of all time, but they're films that you can laugh at and watch it over and over again.
Yeah.
I'm not putting it up there with Citizen Kane or even Vertigo. Foreign film, In the Mood for Love, the Wong Kar-wai film, I think is really good. I've taught a class on Chinese film and politics. I teach another class here on film and politics and comparative perspective. And so I show films every year, and some that I've seen 20 or 25 times. And so you have to, be able to tolerate them, watching them so often. But I try and find films I like and that also have a political message.
Yeah.
So in terms of watching films over and over again, those two come to mind immediately. Woody Allen's Manhattan is another one. I'll be showing that in the fall in my film class, because now that the book Monsters has come out, which is basically a discussion. It's a bestseller. It's a discussion, just came out. It's a discussion on whether we can separate the artist from the art.
Right.
Roman Polanski, Woody Allen, Wagner, and so on and so forth. Yeah. How much should the audience be concerned about the person? And so I'm using Manhattan as an example of that and having them read the book.
Oh, yeah. I'll say Roman Polanski, he did Carnage. Have you seen Carnage?
I haven't seen that one. I've seen most of his films. Yeah. I'm a big, Chinatown's another one I could watch over and over again.
Right.
Yeah. And I show that in my film class.
Yeah. I am a sucker for Woody Allen films. I love almost everything he does. I think it's phenomenal. But yeah, can we separate the art from the artists is always the question. Mm-hmm. So how has the relationship between Hollywood and China evolved over the years, particularly in terms of film collaboration and co-production, because I know they work together a lot of the time? Yeah.
Well, it really begins in a real sense in 1994, when the Chinese box office was really as low as it could be compared to the past. During the Mao years, of course, there were no imports of films, and Mao died in 1976. PRC was founded in 49. Mao died in 76. Then you had a period where they were fighting over whether the Cultural Revolution was good or bad. The reform program begins in 1978, December 78, January 1979, under Deng Xiaoping, the leader. New reforms take place. And there were films that were coming in from Hollywood, but on a flat fee basis. You paid, let's say, $50,000. You can show the film as often as you like. But 1994 was the first agreement with Hollywood studio, Warner Brothers, to import the Harrison film. Mm-hmm. So that was the first of what was called revenue sharing films, where Hollywood got a percentage of the box office, no longer flat fee. I mean, they still sell films on a flat fee. That's separate from what we call the quota system now. But The Fugitive was and in those days, the quota was 10 foreign language films a year, which is basically Hollywood films, especially then. And the Chinese filmmakers and film studios were really up in arms saying, we can't compete with Hollywood. So part of the agreement was to have a percentage of the box office go back to the Chinese studios to help them improve their product. but Hollywood got 10 to 13% in those days. So that was 1994. 2012, the quota went up from 10 to 20. That was when Xi Jinping was in the U.S. As a vice president, and Biden also, I think, was vice president then, and they had this agreement. Quota went up to 20. Wait a second. Let me see if I got that right. No, I'm sorry. I'm getting, my date's wrong. The quota went up to 20 after China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. And in 2012, it went to 34. That was during the Xi-Biden meetings. It went up to 34. And 14 of them had to be IMAX and or 3D films. So that's where it stands now, 34 films. It was a 5-year agreement, which had been renegotiated in 2017, but because of all the U.S.-China issues, they never had any agreement after 2012. So that's kind of the background to the history. The percentage Hollywood gets now is 25%, but if it's co-production, it's 43% of the box office. Still less than what Hollywood makes elsewhere. So you mentioned co-productions, and that's why I mentioned the 43%. There haven't been very many successful co-productions, very, very few with Hollywood. And those that have been co-productions that have been successful have been more Hollywood films than really China films, like The Meg is a good one, Jason Statham film. That's a co-production, which did well, both in China and internationally. Mummy 3 was a co-production. Karate Kid, the new Karate Kid was a co-production. But by and large, most Hollywood studios have decided against co-productions. Iron Man 3, Transformers 4 started out as potential co-productions, but in both cases, they decided that doing what they needed to do to be a co-production in China, in terms of Chinese stars, Chinese story, China crew, the percentage they needed, would damage their international prospects outside China, as well as domestic prospects in North America. So in the end, they decided not to be a co-production, but still did very well in spite of that.
Wow, that's wild. And we've been in this relationship for how long? Since, did you say the
1994.
1994. And before that, obviously it was shut off because Mao, and there was absolutely no film import.
Yeah, well, during the Mao years, they brought in Russian and Eastern European films. And there were some Hollywood films that came in to the Beijing Film Academy, for example, for study. It wasn't completely closed off. But in terms of theatrical releases, they were geared toward Russia and Eastern Europe. And then after the reform program began in January 79, it was much easier to get Hollywood films in there. And of course, the market for pirated films was really widespread. We have 400 or 500 at least films I bought from vendors I know in China, which are not Hollywood films. I wasn't interested in Hollywood films, but I was interested in Chinese films, Asian films, international films, which were not available in the U.S. I bought a lot of films which I could not easily get otherwise.
Yeah,
I didn't want a pirated copy of a Top Gun or a film like that, which I'd much rather get in a Blu-ray copy, which I know will play and play well.
Yeah, I mean, during the time of Mao, do you know if there was films being made? Is it like about worker pride and stuff like this?
Oh, absolutely. The Maoist period, I showed some in my Chinese film and politics class. There were some excellent films being made at various times, but the box office was very large in those days, in part because the tickets were so cheap. Everybody was going to the movies. China had television come in relatively late, quite late actually. I remember going to China. I've been there maybe 75 times. I've been going there for the last almost 45 years or
Wow.
so. And so when television first came in, I used to walk around in various cities, and I would see somebody had an early television, and outside the window there was a crowd gathered just to watch what was going on TV. It was rare. And there's some very interesting Chinese films made about television sets and the introduction of television sets. I don't want to go into the names because they're Chinese names and wouldn't help, but yeah. So film was really, it was, since Lenin had spoken about the importance of film as propaganda. The Chinese Communist Party also felt that this was a great source. They would take mobile projection teams out to the countryside and show films on screens, which are not much better than bedroom sheets as a screen. So this was a way to publicize what they wanted people to know about China and for the Communist Party. Film was incredibly important in the Maoist period.
It seems to be important for every empire to get a certain kind of feeling behind or ideology behind a country. Film is so inspirational and so touching and moving that I'm sure the United States has done its part to come up with films that have been, funded by the Department of Defense.
That's right. Absolutely. Top Gun is a good example of a film that really got some help in terms of filming all those aerial scenes. I mean, Top Gun Maverick, certainly as well. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. This is so funny to me. So I wonder which movies throughout history have been contrived for patriotic purposes and which ones were just genuine, kind of artistic. And I'm kind of an artist myself, so I think, well, integrity is important. But so what are some of the challenges and opportunities for Hollywood filmmakers in the Chinese film market?
Well, you're talking about right now, I assume.
Well, yeah, we're flashing forward. Yeah.
Okay, let's look at it right now. Challenges are great. The 3 years of COVID really had one thing is audience tastes have changed, and recent Hollywood films have not done as well as hoped or expected. Even Avatar 2, which is by far the biggest Hollywood film in China in recent years. In 2023, it made $246 million US dollars in China, but they had hoped for as much as 700 million. It's made 2.3 billion worldwide after all. China still is the biggest overseas market. France, I believe, was second at 157 million. I think Germany was about 148 million. So Avatar 2 has been very successful in China. They love James Cameron there. And I can spend a fair amount of time talking about why they like Avatar so much, technology and so on.
Yeah.
But other films have also underperformed. Guardians of the Galaxy is at this point less than 30 million US and is expected to make hopefully as much as 70 million. But that's in the first two Guardians of the Galaxy films. Thus far, the top, aside from Avatar, the other highest ranked film with the box office American film was Ant-Man and Wasp, which made, I think, $39 million. Super Mario Brothers has really underperformed, considering it's made over $1 billion worldwide. The China market has been very meager. It's been in the 20 plus million, I think, at this point. 26 million, something like that. So that's really underperformed. So Hollywood, I think, now realizes that when you're looking at a budget for a film and taking into account international markets, it's still very important. I mean, for any of these blockbuster films, by and large, 70% of the market often comes from overseas, not North America anymore. That's a big change. And for something like Fast and Furious, it's even more than that. And of course, that's coming out on May 7th. We have a real test case coming up, several of them. Fast and Furious 10, I think it is now. That is coming out May 17th. And then you've got Little Mermaid. Oh, something just dropped. Little Mermaid is coming out on May 26th. Transformers, Rise of the Beasts is coming out. That's on June 9th. And those are films that should do well in China. So we'll wait and see. And if they don't do well, it's going to be relatively bleak for Hollywood. At the same time, you can't write China off. Because for some films, the China market is very important. But not the way it was when Hollywood was getting over 50% of the market. It's not that way anymore. I think if they get 30%, it's good these days. And of course, you have. We spent a lot of time talking about the market itself. You have 4 periods of the year, which are the big periods in China, with about 50% of the box office. And that would be Lunar New Year, call it Chinese New Year if you like, the summer holiday, what they call Golden Week of National Day around October 1st. That's the patriotic films, particularly. And then end of the year, the International New Year. Those 4 periods make up about 50% of the market for China.
Wow.
And then you've got about 80,000 screens in China, but the most recent screens have been built in what we call Tier 3 and Tier 4 cities, which are not used to watching Hollywood films the way people in the big cities are. So that's kind of difficult for Hollywood to expand there. If you look at the surveys, the Hollywood films do less well in those kinds of cities compared to Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen. That. So it's really challenging now, and censorship has been tightened up since the Film Bureau has been put under the Chinese Communist Party propaganda department, Central Committee propaganda department. Now there is perhaps a ray of hope in that the new head of the China Film Bureau, Mao Yu is his name, in March was appointed. And he is a film executive, somebody who has made a career in film in one way or another. And so that's better than the previous head from the propaganda department, who basically didn't know anything much about film. And we already see since March some indication that there's a greater interest reaching out to the outside world. China has a presence at the Cannes Film Festival this month, bigger than it has been in recent years because of COVID, of course. The Asian film market, Hong Kong, has a big presence. So China has 3 entries in various divisions of the Cannes Film Festival in terms of independent films. So China is trying to show they're internationalized. And for a while, they were taking no Hollywood films at all. And I think they were concerned about that because Hollywood in the past has been very helpful because they want the China market. In making a Hollywood blockbuster film, it was not uncommon to include something positive about China, like The Martian would be one example. Or Arrival would be another example.
Interesting.
Or 2012 is another good example of that. Or Transformers 4 is another good example of that. China was written into the plot in a positive. Looper is another example of that. China was written into the plot in a positive way. And that doesn't seem to be the case anymore because, in part, the China market is not as important as it used to be. And in part, because the American government, the American Congress, is pushing back against this overindulgence of a country like China. And so if you look at the PEN America report, I think it's called Made in China, Censored by Hollywood, or Made in Hollywood, Censored by, sorry. I was a consultant on the report. I should know this. Made in China, Censored by Hollywood.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a very good report on this issue. of Hollywood's relationship with China.
So how is the Chinese film industry scaling up against Hollywood right now? Are they doing okay? Will they be able to make their own and then become like they are becoming the economic superpower? Will they become the soft power superpower, by spreading wonderful film?
Well, soft power is something, I work on in terms of research. I co-edited a book in 2020 that came out on Chinese soft power. So I'm very interested in that. I teach a class on soft power at USC, actually, the concept of soft power in political science and international relations. It's there, since I could go on as a professor, I can go on for days talking about this, but yeah. China's soft power, number one, is for the domestic audience primarily. They want to get people to love the Communist Party. And so their films are made for a domestic audience. They have almost no international success, by and large, little international success. That was not the case 2001 to 2006. The Chinese films did extremely well internationally, including North America. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, that's An Lee, he's from Taiwan, but he made the film in China. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which came out in December 2000, made $128 million in the United States and Canada, still more than twice as much as other foreign language marketed in North America.
Wow, that's incredible.
Hero, the Zhang Yimou film, came out in 2003, I believe, and made $53 million. That's number 3 all time in the North American market. And you had a lot of martial arts films doing very well from 2001 to 2006. But after that, it's been very bleak for Chinese films in North America and other territories. With very rare exceptions, they just haven't done well because they're made basically for a domestic audience. One thing China has been doing lately is to make copies of American films. And in fact, there's a big push on in China for remakes of foreign language films in Chinese for a Chinese audience. But if you look at Top Gun Maverick and Top Gun, China has a film called Born to Fly. In fact, The Economist this week, the May 5th issue, this week, that I just got in the mail yesterday, has an article on how Born to Fly is a significant film because it shows audiences about preparing for a war with the United States, in effect. This is really, so the Economist article is quite alarming. Now, this film that was finished in terms of shooting in May 2022, and it was scheduled to come out September 30th for the big National Day patriotic holiday. But for reasons that were never explained, it was shelved. And maybe because they were afraid it was too anti-American. So in January 2023, they put out a whole set of new promotional materials and said the film would come out in May. And it did. It came out this month. Perhaps they made it more anti-American than it originally was. You don't know in China because it's very opaque. You don't know what's going on, basically. But I would say it made $44 million in the opening May Day weekend. But I would say that it's underperformed. It's made about $90 million, which is not a lot for this kind of film. It's just kind of underperformed. But looking at film and politics, it's very significant politically. So that's Born to Fly it's kind of like Top Gun. It's about elite test pilots, very much like Top Gun. It's China's version of Top Gun, which hasn't shown in China. But then you've got Godspeed, which is, I think, number 2 at the box office on the May Day holiday. And that has been compared to, what was the film? I think I had written it down somewhere. I don't know where, but that was Meet the Parents. That's, yeah, Meet the Parents. It's like that. It's kind of like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the Robert De Niro.
Good flick. Good flick.
Yeah. It was followed by Meet the Fockers, as I remember.
Right. And then there's like another one, Little Fockers.
Yeah, I didn't want to go too far with the conference.
Right.
Okay.
The sequels.
Yeah.
They'll get you. So the United States is also guilty of doing the same thing, though, and portraying China as the enemy. And I know that you had some examples of that.
Well, I think that you see more of that in TV. Sitcoms like South Park, for example, are very in your face about that. And I do show the South Park episode called Banned in China, BAND, Banned in China, which is really over the top. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah.
It's over the top. It criticized. Mickey Mouse comes in for incredibly harsh criticism. Winnie the Pooh gets killed in that. LeBron James, James Harden, they're all shown in a very negative light. It's a fascinating thing to watch. But when it comes to feature films, they're still not comfortable. Actually, they're not comfortable making any nation an enemy after the interview and what North Korea did with the Sony hat. You just have to be very careful who you offend. So it's in the case of Top Gun Maverick, the country is not named. And I would have thought Iran would be the logical suspect, except that it's snowing there. And I don't think it snows in Iran. I could be wrong.
No, up in the higher mountains a little bit, I think. Yeah, because they're on like near the mountains in the north. So I've seen.
Okay, so maybe it is Iran, but nobody's ever named in that film. And in a lot of the James Bond films, is these multinational conglomerate crime syndicates. We seem to speak with Russian and Eastern European accents, of course, but no country is named. And you have these media megalomaniacs that are not presumably based on real people, but maybe they are. But there's no country that you want to offend these days. So I think what's happened with Hollywood is they've gone from a very pro-China stance because of the market to a stance where it's best not to consider discussing China if we can avoid it.
Interesting. Wow. Well, whatever strategy works, I guess, but the politics are saying that China, or the economics of the situation is China is doing better than the United States to some degree. So I wonder how the film part of it will play out.
Well, I think the economy basically has not been doing well because of the policies during COVID, especially the zero COVID policy, which went on for far too long. And then all of a sudden, overnight, changing to no restrictions, no testing, and not reporting the number of deaths that actually took place accurately at all. So what they're doing, China now is reaching out internationally. It's a very tough time for them because they obviously are supporting Russia and Ukraine in spite of the claims of neutrality. And they're trying to peel away some of the European support for the United States and split that alliance, which is not easy to do. Germany has a big market in China, especially for their automobiles. Macron from France, who's under a lot of attack within China itself. Macron got a lot of flack back in Europe, even within France, for basically very pro-China arguments when he was in China. And basically talking about we have an independent Europe should have an independent foreign policy, not subject to the United States. Taiwan is not of that much interest to us. And so you have a lot of splits in Europe right now, and China wants to peel away some of these countries. But they're reaching out because the economy has not been doing well, I would say. And that relates to the entire COVID lockdowns and so on.
Yeah. And this is also something we're still grappling with, and also kind of saying, well, we got to do what's right by the economy. And so everybody has said, well, it's over.
Yeah. Well, let's see about the debt ceiling. That's very frightening.
That's the next thing, right? This perplexes me because it seems like we're just going to keep printing money until we, get ourselves out of these kind of situations. But the money's not attached to any kind of, it's not attached to gold or whatever like this. So what, I mean, maybe this is outside your wheelhouse, but
Yeah, yeah, it probably is. I mean, I don't want any economist saying I don't. It is outside my wheelhouse. I'm not an economist.
right. Me either. So we'll leave it at that. So I'll ask you one more question before we go. Is there anything that you're excited about, or any movies that you can recommend for me tonight?
Oh, so this is not just Chinese films.
No, this is just, and I'll take anything. I was doing period pieces last night, like Gangs of New York. I rewatched Titanic, just something with a nice old-timey feel.
Well, it's I watched the films I was most looking forward to. Probably Tar, I would say, because I'm a big fan of classical music and I like the Mahler Fifth Symphony. And so I watched Tar, and very interesting film. I thought the last part of the film kind of veered into some unknown territory, and it's been interpreted as anything from a dream of Kate Blanchett in the film, or to any number of other things. But I thought it was an interesting film, and again, it gets to that argument I made earlier about separating the artist from the art. A person who has a lot of personal flaws, but apparently, at least in the film, is a great conductor. But that was okay. It was good. Everything Everywhere All at Once, I watched early on and thought it was okay. I'm a big fan of Michelle Yeoh. I was at a conference with her at the University of Notre Dame years ago, and she was extremely friendly to the professors there. It was a 2-day conference on Chinese film. Very, very nice person. So I was rooting for her. I didn't think it was as good as I thought it would be. And then after all these Academy Awards, I watched it again, and I liked it a little bit better the second time. But I didn't see any film this year that stood out as an Academy Award winner. I mean, in the sense that you think of films from the past that are still resonating today. The films I show in my film class, like On the Waterfront from 1954, for example. Manchurian Candidate from 1962. Chinatown from 1974. Do the Right Thing from 1989. Films that still resonate. Contagion from 2011 about this virus. And these things still have an impact today. And, I didn't think any of the films this year basically met that.
Which year did Parasite come out? Because that was the last really highly nominated film.
Parasite was a great film. I have to go back and check that. That would have been around 2019 or so. I mean, it's hard.
I think
but that was a great film. I show Old Boy.
Yeah, sure.
The South Korean film. I showed Tampopo, the Japanese film from 1986. The only reason I'm not showing Parasite in my class is I think a lot of people have already seen it. And also, I'm already showing Old Boy. And both films are about inequalities. I love Parasite. It's a great, great film.
Yeah. For a modern film, you and I probably agree that there's a lot of classics that really, it's hard to find a good movie in these days versus the before times. I mean, and the eras of cinema. What's your favorite era of cinema?
Well, a lot of people. Well, I like them all depending on the film, individual films. But a lot of people say the 1970s because by the late 60s they finally eliminated all the censorship. And so there's a real outpouring of great films in the 1970s. And so that's probably, and there are several documentaries and several books written about the 70s. And one of them I assigned in class. And you have books like Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, A Decade Under the Influence, documentary films and books. So I would say the 70s probably was the high tide of American, especially independent film.
Cool. Good to know. I agree with you there. I think things like Taxi Driver and some of Scorsese's early films. And you also had The Jerk, which came out, and The Muppet Movie. It was some of my favorites, too.
Yeah, it had a lot of different kinds of things.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there. Look, you're a wonderful human being. You're awesome to talk with. It's Stanley Rosen, Ph.D., professor of political science and international relation at the University of Southern California. Is there anything you want to add before we go?
No, the only thing I would add that which you can eliminate is my screen now simply has Microsoft give me a sign-in page. So I don't see you. I don't see myself. I don't know if you see me or not.
I see.
I don't. Okay, as long as you see me. But right now, I've been kicked out by Microsoft. Yeah. I'm not sure why.
Shame on technology. It's going to kill us all. All right. Well, I'll sign off to everybody in TV land. Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming. We'll see you next time.